The year was 1945. Germany was collapsing under the weight of its own promises. Cities once paraded as the heart of a mighty Reich now lay in gray, smoking ruins. Bridges hung broken over black rivers. Railway stations yawned with shattered glass. And in every direction, columns of refugees shuffled westward with hollow eyes and bundles of whatever life they could carry. Amid this tide of defeat moved young women in worn uniforms. Not soldiers with rifles, but clerks, radio operators, and anti-aircraft auxiliaries. They had been told they were part of history's unstoppable machine. Now they were prisoners, waiting for an uncertain fate. Liesel Krauss was 21, a typist who had once worked in a Luftwaffe office in Hamburg. She had grown up with the quiet pride of doing her duty, even if she had never fired a weapon. When the British bombed the city night after night, she wrote reports by candlelight, believing every page she typed helped defend the fatherland. Now, as she stood in a muddy holding yard outside Bremen with hundreds of other young women, her boots sinking into cold sludge, she felt none of that certainty. Her fingers, once quick across the typewriter keys, clenched around a battered satchel. In it were a comb, 2 photographs, and a folded letter from her mother telling her to stay strong, though the ink had blurred with tears long before Liesel received it. Around her, whispered rumors curled like smoke. The Soviets would take revenge, someone said. Women taken east never returned. Others swore the Americans would humiliate them, shave their heads, force them to work until they collapsed. One girl muttered about being paraded in chains. No one knew the truth, and the unknown was a cold, gnawing thing. When an Allied truck rattled up and men in foreign uniforms gestured for them to climb aboard, Liesel's legs trembled. She obeyed anyway. Surrender had stripped away choice. The convoy moved west under gray skies. Through the slats of the truck, the women watched a country they no longer recognized. Scorched barns, empty villages, children scavenging in fields. At night they slept in barns under watchful guards, their breath clouding in the chill. Each mile carried them farther from home and deeper into uncertainty. For many, this was the first time seeing the enemy's faces up close. Young Americans in khaki, speaking a language that sounded sharp and fast. They were neither monstrous nor friendly, just distant, professional, unreadable. Days later, at a port bustling with Allied supply ships and captured equipment, the women were herded onto a vessel flying the Stars and Stripes. Liesel stood on the gangway, one hand on the railing, heart pounding as the salty Atlantic wind slapped her face. She had expected a grim cargo hold, but found the ship crowded yet orderly. Hammocks swung in rows, food was ladled from steaming pots, and though the guards watched closely, they did not strike or curse. It was confusing, disarming in a way she did not trust. The voyage stretched on. Sea spray slicked the decks, and the ship groaned through gray waves. Some of the women grew seasick. Others huddled below, singing quiet songs to keep fear at bay. Liesel befriended Anna Vogel, a 19-year-old telephone operator with an easy smile that belied the terror in her eyes. Anna joked about seasickness and tried to teach the Americans a few German words, earning awkward grins. "They're not devils," she whispered once, half incredulous, half hopeful. But at night she clutched her jacket tight, whispering prayers that the unknown would not crush them. When at last the ship slipped into the wide harbor of New York, the sight stunned them. The Statue of Liberty loomed pale in the morning haze, not triumphant, but strangely serene. Beyond it rose a skyline of glass and steel, untouched by war. The women leaned over the rails in silence. They had imagined rubble and chaos everywhere. Instead, America seemed impossibly whole. Some felt anger at the unfairness of such untouched wealth, while their families starved. Others felt only small and exhausted. Disembarkation was brisk. Guards directed them into waiting trains. The Americans were efficient but not cruel. No one shouted or struck. There were inspections, papers stamped, medical checks performed with clinical detachment. For Liesel, every moment was a tightrope of dread. Each door could open onto a nightmare. Yet what came was not rage or humiliation, just procedure. As the train rattled inland, she sat beside Anna, both staring at the endless patchwork of green fields and small towns flashing past. It looked peaceful, almost dreamlike after the ruins of Hamburg. Yet the barbed wire that would soon surround them hovered in every thought. They arrived first at a transit camp, a sprawl of wooden barracks behind tall fences. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Armed guards walked the perimeter, but there was an unexpected orderliness to everything. Gravel paths swept clean, bunks lined with blankets, Red Cross boxes stacked neatly. Some of the women dared to exhale, though no one felt safe yet. "This is only the beginning," muttered an older auxiliary with hollow cheeks. "Wait until they decide what to do with us." Days blurred into a strange rhythm. Interrogations came, but not with beatings or screams, rather with measured questions about duties, commanders, code names. Food was plain but filling, bread, soup, even meat. After years of rationing, some wept quietly over their first full stomachs. The fear did not vanish, but it shifted into confusion. How could an enemy so feared treat them with such detached fairness? Was it mercy or something colder? One evening, Lisel and Anna stood near the fence watching an orange sunset melt behind the pines. Anna whispered, "Do you think they'll keep us here forever?" Lisel didn't know. Her heart ached for her mother, for the familiar streets now buried under rubble. Yet another part of her, the part that had expected immediate brutality, felt the first faint tremor of relief. Relief tinged with guilt. Then came the orders. They were being transferred deeper inland to permanent camps. The name meant nothing, Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, but the sound of it felt foreign, almost exotic. They boarded trucks again, then trains, each step taking them further from the war-torn continent they knew. Rumors swirled anew. Work camps, forced labor, worse. Some clung to hope that America might be gentler than expected. Others warned that the mask would soon drop. As the train thundered through the dark American night, Liesel stared out the window at vast moonlit fields. She thought of her father lost on the Eastern Front, of propaganda films showing America as a land of cruelty and chaos. Nothing so far had matched those films. That frightened her more than hate ever had, because it meant the story she'd believed might have been a lie. She closed her eyes as the wheels clattered, a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Somewhere ahead, beyond more fences and guards, awaited a prison unlike anything she could imagine. It would not be the nightmare she feared. In some ways, that might prove even more dangerous, because kindness has a way of unraveling certainties built in the dark. The first morning inside the permanent camp was not what Liesel Krauss had braced herself for. She woke to the metallic clang of a distant bell and the cool hush of pine-scented air drifting through the slatted window of a wooden barrack. The bunkhouse was spare but orderly, 2 neat rows of cots, folded wool blankets, a pot-belly stove warming the chill. Sunlight striped the floor in golden bars. It was, she thought with disbelief, cleaner than the ruined apartment she had left behind in Hamburg. Across from her, Anna Vogel sat upright, hair mussed but eyes bright with restless curiosity. "It smells like a summer camp," Anna whispered, half mocking, half amazed. Liesel didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They shuffled out to roll call under the watch of American guards who carried rifles but wore calm, almost bored expressions. There was no shouting, no wild display of power, just names read from a clipboard, orderly columns formed, and a quiet dismissal to breakfast. The mess hall smelled of coffee and oatmeal. Oatmeal, a food Liesel had not tasted in years. She ate slowly, still waiting for the cruelty everyone said would come. Yet it didn't. The guards observed but did not leer. Some even offered brief, awkward smiles. It was disorienting, and disorientation could be its own kind of fear. Days took on a rhythm. Mornings began with inspection, then work assignments, kitchen duty, sewing, sorting supplies, sometimes tending vegetable patches beyond the fence. The Americans seemed determined to keep idleness at bay, but not to break them. For women used to endless bombings and desperate queues for bread, the predictability felt alien. The first time Liesel was handed a rake to tend the camp's small gardens, she half expected it to be some trick. Yet nothing happened but work under a hot Georgia sun and the quiet hum of cicadas. She felt her heart beat slow, her hands remembering the feel of soil instead of soot. Evenings were stranger still. Someone uncovered a battered piano in the recreation hall. Soon music filled the compound. Anna, gifted with a warm alto voice, joined a makeshift choir that sang German folk songs and, shyly at first, American tunes. There were English classes, too, chalk dust hanging in the air as guards turned teachers scribbled simple phrases on a board. Liesel struggled with the unfamiliar sounds, but loved the escape learning offered. Each small kindness confused her more. If the enemy treated you like a human being, what did that make your hatred? Yet the most surreal moment came weeks later, on a shimmering afternoon when the heat pressed like a hand against the earth. The women were led, not to a work detail, but toward a fenced-off area behind the main barracks. There, beyond a row of pines, lay a turquoise rectangle gleaming in the sun, a swimming pool. At first, they thought it must be for the guards, but an American officer, tall and sunburned, gestured with an almost sheepish grin they could use it. A ripple of stunned laughter ran through the group. Some clapped their hands to their mouths. One girl cried outright, overwhelmed by the absurdity. Pools belonged to childhood holidays, long erased by bombs, not to prisoners of war. Anna was the first to test the water. She slipped in with a squeal, emerging with wet hair slicked back and eyes wide with disbelief. Liesel followed slowly, each step into the cool water, feeling like a betrayal of the grim identity she had carried. Soon the pool was alive with splashes and tentative joy. Guards leaned on the fence, half amused, half wary, but no one stopped them. For the first time in years, Liesel felt weightless, not just physically, but in the soul-crushing sense of being seen only as an enemy. She felt, if briefly, like a girl again. The irony was not lost on anyone. Letters home could never mention this. Censors would strike such details, and besides, it felt almost shameful to admit. Families were starving among rubble while their daughters swam under a foreign sun. At night, some women whispered guilt into their pillows. Others whispered questions. If the Americans were this civilized, what else had they been wrong about? Even the die-hard believers, those who had once scolded others for doubting Nazi righteousness, found their certainty softening at the edges. Propaganda had painted America as brutal and chaotic. Yet here were full bowls of stew, doctors who checked fevers gently, and guards who averted their eyes politely when women changed into swimsuits. Still, the camp was no paradise. Freedom ended at the fence, and the wire was always there, glittering cruelly when the sun hit it. Some guards were curt, suspicious, quick to remind them of their prisoner status. Homesickness gnawed at them all. News from Germany, when it came, was grim. Fathers missing, cities flattened, food scarce. Liesel once received a letter saying her mother now shared a single room with 3 other families. The guilt of safety weighed heavy. She swam, she laughed sometimes. But each small joy was shadowed by images of rubble and hunger an ocean away. Conflict brewed quietly among the prisoners, too. A handful of hardline Nazis, older auxiliaries steeped in ideology, warned the younger women against softening. They whispered that kindness was a trap, that the Americans only wanted to rewire their minds. Liesel felt their eyes when she practiced English or lingered near the pool. Anna dismissed the warnings with a toss of her hair, but Liesel felt torn. She had believed so deeply in Germany's cause, to let it go felt like betraying her father's sacrifice. And yet, she could not ignore what she saw. Truth was creeping in through every unguarded moment of normalcy. One Sunday, the camp hosted a small concert. The choir sang alongside a handful of American soldiers with guitars. The music floated over the compound as twilight softened the world. Liesel sat on the edge of the pool listening, the humid air thick with the scent of pine and chlorine. A sergeant offered her a cigarette, not with arrogance, but casual camaraderie. She took it, hand trembling, and for a heartbeat, they were just 2 young people sharing smoke and silence. Something shifted inside her, something that frightened and freed her all at once. That night she dreamed not of bombs, but of walking unguarded streets lined with lights, of voices speaking languages she might learn. She woke ashamed but also strangely alive. Perhaps survival was more than just enduring. Perhaps it was opening to whatever humanity reached across the wire. Weeks slipped into months. The pool became less of a novelty and more a quiet sanctuary. English lessons grew bolder. Liesel could now ask for a book, thank a guard, joke with Anna about George's relentless heat. Yet each small victory of adaptation deepened the rift within her. Who was she now? A dutiful daughter of the Reich, or something else entirely? Then, one morning, a notice went up. A visiting American delegation would tour the camp. Among them were officials tasked with evaluating the re-education potential of certain prisoners. Rumors flew. Some said women might be offered work. Others feared harsher questioning. For Liesel, the announcement felt like a drumbeat of destiny. If the Americans saw them as more than enemies, what future might that hold? And if they didn't, what would become of all this fragile, forbidden hope born behind the wire? She stood at the fence that evening, watching the pool shimmer under the dying light. Its surface was calm now, but beneath it swirled the unsteady waters of everything she thought she knew. Tomorrow, strangers would look into her eyes and decide what kind of enemy, or person, she truly was. The arrival of the American delegation came with little fanfare, yet it changed the air inside the camp. Trucks rolled through the gates one crisp morning, tires crunching over gravel, bringing officers in pressed uniforms and civilian officials with notebooks tucked beneath their arms. The prisoners lined up for inspection stood stiffly as curious eyes swept over them. Some women looked down, unwilling to meet the gaze of their captors. Others, defiant, stared back. Liesel Krauss felt her pulse hammer in her throat. She had learned enough English to catch fragments, attitude, potential, education, but not enough to know her fate. Anna Vogel squeezed her hand briefly, a quick, secret gesture that felt like borrowed courage. The visitors walked the compound, nodding at the gardens, the orderly barracks, the recreation hall with its battered piano. They paused at the swimming pool, where the water caught the morning light like a shard of sky. One official scribbled something quickly, expression unreadable. To Liesel, it felt like being measured not just as a prisoner, but as a person. And she didn't know which frightened her more. After the delegation departed, whispers spread faster than mosquitoes in the summer heat. The Americans weren't only cataloging them, they were studying them. Some said it was to decide who could be rehabilitated, a word that slithered into conversations and stayed there. Others muttered about brainwashing. The older women, those who still clung to the remnants of Nazi pride, warned everyone to resist. "Do not let them rewrite who you are," one snapped at Liesel after catching her with an English primaire. "Your father died for your homeland. Don't shame his memory with their lies." The rebuke stung like a slap, but daily life pressed forward, and with it came quiet, subversive acts of curiosity. Classes expanded, history lessons told from the American perspective. Films that showed not only Allied victories, but the liberation of camps. Images of skeletal prisoners and mass graves that turned stomachs and silenced conversation. Liesel watched one such reel in the recreation hall, the projector humming, the room heavy with the smell of dust and sweat. The pictures contradicted everything she had been told, that Germany was a righteous defender, that tales of atrocities were foreign propaganda. She felt cold even in the humid air, her fingers gripping the wooden chair as if it might steady the spin of her thoughts. Anna cried quietly beside her. No one mocked her for it. That night the camp was hushed. In one corner of the barracks, the die-hard loyalists whispered furiously, claiming the film was fake, staged to break their spirits. "They are clever," one insisted. "They know how to twist truth." But their voices lacked the iron certainty they once carried. Doubt had seeped in, invisible but potent. For Liesel, the struggle became personal and relentless. Letters from home spoke of hunger and rubble, of black markets and absent fathers. Her mother's latest note arrived on Red Cross stationery, the handwriting thinner, shakier. "Food is scarce, but we endure," it said, though the page smelled faintly of smoke. The world her leaders had promised to defend lay in ruins. Meanwhile, the Americans, though still her captors, treated her with an odd, steady dignity. A guard once helped her repair a broken shoelace without a word. Another left an extra apple on her dinner tray, pretending not to notice when she hesitated before taking it. These were small things, but they eroded the fortress of hate built through years of schooling and slogans. Anna embraced the shift more easily. She learned new songs in English and sang them with mischievous delight, even though it earned her glares. "Why cling to ghosts?" she asked Liesel one evening as they shelled beans on the barrack steps, the air sweet with summer grass. "We lost. They lied to us. Isn't it better to know?" Liesel wanted to agree, but fear of betraying her dead father held her tongue. Belief, even when cracked, dies slowly. The Americans, for their part, seemed to understand the power of quiet influence. Books appeared in the library, novels, newspapers, even poetry. Guards organized debates about democracy and freedom, framed not as lectures but as conversations. Liesel joined one out of curiosity, sitting silently at first, then daring to ask a question about women's roles in American society. The sergeant leading the session answered kindly, as if her question mattered. Something uncoiled inside her, not full trust, but the faintest belief that an enemy might see her as human. Yet the conflict never vanished. One evening, a group of loyalists confronted Anna by the pool. Voices rose, accusations flew. Traitor, fool, puppet. Liesel stepped between them without thinking, her heart pounding. "Enough," she said in shaky German. "We can think for ourselves." The older women spat back venom, but something shifted in the crowd. Younger faces looked less certain, more willing to question. Afterward, Anna laughed weakly, but Liesel could see the tremor in her hands. Defying old loyalties was dangerous, even here. Autumn brought cooler air and a subtle change in the camp's atmosphere. The guards relaxed slightly. The fences seemed less menacing, though they still defined every horizon. Liesel could now write full sentences in English. She read American magazines with fascination and unease. Images of smiling families, modern kitchens, a nation untouched by the devastation that haunted her dreams. She wondered what her life might have been had she been born here, far from bomb sirens and indoctrination. The thought was both comforting and painful. Then came a day that felt like a small quake beneath everything she had rebuilt. During an evening screening, the Americans showed footage of the Nuremberg trials, Nazi leaders on display, exposed, condemned. Liesel saw faces she had once admired, dragged through evidence of crimes too vast to comprehend. The camera lingered on the ruins of ideology, the moral reckoning laid bare. Around her, women wept, argued, or sat frozen. Liesel felt as if someone had cut a thread inside her chest. Whatever pride had remained cracked deeply that night. Afterward, she walked alone to the fence. The sky was clear, stars sharp against the dark. Somewhere beyond the wire, America carried on untouched. Somewhere across the ocean, her mother still struggled to survive. Between those worlds stood Liesel, no longer sure where she belonged or what she believed. The wire's shadow stretched across her feet like a dividing line. Behind her, Anna's voice broke the silence. "Maybe the war isn't just lost," she said softly. "Maybe it was wrong." Liesel turned, tears prickling but unshed. She had no answer, not yet. The girl who once typed orders for a regime now stood trembling on the edge of a new, terrifying understanding that survival might mean rebuilding her very sense of truth. From the guard tower, a beam of light swept slowly across the yard, catching the glint of the pool, the barracks, the eyes of women caught between past and future. In that pale glow, Liesel felt both exposed and strangely awake. Change had begun, and there would be no returning to the certainty she once carried. Somewhere ahead waited a choice she could not yet name, but it was coming, and it would not be gentle. The day the gates opened was strangely quiet. No bands played, no triumphant banners waved, just a convoy of trucks idling in pale winter light, waiting to return prisoners to a country that no longer resembled the one they had left. Liesel Krauss stood among the women, her thin coat buttoned to the throat, satchel clutched tight. Months of safety behind fences had dulled certain fears, but now a different dread took hold, the fear of going home to nothing. Beside her, Anna Vogel hummed softly, a nervous habit she'd picked up in English class, though her eyes betrayed the same unease. The Americans processed them with brisk efficiency. Papers were signed, Final medical checks done, guards who had once seemed distant now offered brief nods, even shy smiles. One sergeant, the same man who had given Liselle an apple months earlier, handed her a packet of cigarettes with a quiet, "Good luck." She tried to reply, but could only whisper a thank you. When the truck doors clanged shut, she felt a pang of loss she hadn't expected. For all its barbed wire, the camp had been predictable, safe. Out there, beyond the fences, was hunger, rubble, and judgment. The journey east felt endless. Trains groaned across vast plains, through cities alive with American prosperity, then onto ships bound for the broken shores of Europe. The sea this time was colder, rougher. Some women were silent, others restless with dread. Anna tried to lighten the air, teasing about how they would shock their families with tales of swimming pools and English songs. Liesel only smiled faintly. She doubted anyone back home wanted to hear about comfort in captivity. When they finally docked in Bremerhaven, the air smelled of ash and damp stone. The port was a skeleton of rusted cranes and cracked warehouses. As they disembarked, the women stood blinking at the gray ruins that had once been Germany's proud doorway to the world. Liesel's chest tightened. Homecoming should feel warm. This felt like stepping into a grave. Red Cross workers and weary officials processed them quickly, more concerned with paperwork than welcome. There were no waiting families. Most had no way to know when or if their daughters would return. Liselle and Anna traveled together as far as Hamburg. The train crept through landscapes of destruction, forests of chimneys without houses, children scavenging in rubble, entire districts reduced to blackened shells. Anna's chatter faltered, her optimism cracking in the face of what they saw. When they arrived, Hamburg barely resembled the city Liesel had once known. Streets she had walked as a schoolgirl were now heaps of brick. Her childhood apartment block was gone, replaced by a crater. Her mother, she learned after hours of searching, had been moved to a shared flat across town. Liselle walked through the cold to find her, each step heavier with shame for the full meal she'd eaten while her family starved. Her mother's embrace was fierce but trembling. She had aged years in months, thinner, eyes dulled by exhaustion. "You're alive," she whispered, again and again, before stepping back to look at her daughter with wary curiosity. Liesel tried to explain the camp, but words failed. How could she speak of clean barracks and libraries to someone who had bartered for bread? She said simply that the Americans had treated them fairly. Her mother's face tightened, not in anger, but in a grief too complex to name. "We were told they hated us," she murmured. Maybe that was another lie. Life after captivity was no simple return. Jobs were scarce, food scarcer. Former auxiliaries were viewed with suspicion. Some neighbors muttered about traitors and collaborators. Liesel kept her head down, typing letters for a relief office by day, helping her mother by night. Yet inside, the quiet revolution begun in Georgia kept unfolding. She found herself questioning speeches on the radio, mistrusting easy slogans. The certainty she once wore like armor was gone, replaced by something harder but truer. Doubt paired with a yearning for honesty. Anna, always bolder, embraced change openly. She found work with a reconstruction agency and began speaking English at home, shocking neighbors. Once, when accused of being too American now, she laughed and said, "Better that than blind." Liesel admired her courage, but lacked the same fire. Still, when Anna invited her to a small meeting of young Germans discussing democracy and rebuilding, Liesel went. She listened more than she spoke, but being there felt like stepping into light after years underground, yet guilt was a stubborn ghost. Some nights, Liesel dreamed of her father on the Eastern Front, his face proud as he marched into a war built on lies. She feared betraying him by letting go of everything he'd believed. But then she remembered the starving children in the rubble, the images from the liberation films, the quiet decency of the American Guard who had tied her shoelace without a word. Slowly, painfully, she chose to honor his sacrifice, not by clinging to falsehood, but by refusing to be fooled again. One autumn evening, months after her return, Liesel and Anna walked along the Elbe. The river mirrored a pale wounded moon. They spoke of the camp for the first time without flinching. The pool, the music, the strange kindness. "Sometimes I think that saved us," Anna said softly. Not just our bodies, our minds. Liesel nodded, feeling the truth settle in her chest like a fragile seed. The world could be cruel, but it could also surprise. And perhaps survival meant staying open to that surprise. As they stood in silence, church bells rang faintly over the ruined city, a sound of stubborn endurance. Liesel thought of the barbed wire that had once caged her and realized it had not been the true prison. The real walls were the stories she had believed, the hatred she had been fed. Those walls were cracking now. Far down the river, an American supply ship moved slowly toward the sea, its lights glimmering on dark water. Liesel watched until it disappeared, feeling a strange ache, part loss, part gratitude, part resolve. War had taken her home, her certainty, and nearly her humanity. But in an unexpected place, an enemy had handed her back a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. She turned to Anna and whispered, "We can build something better." Anna squeezed her hand. Behind them, the city waited, wounded but breathing. Ahead, the future was uncertain, but it belonged at last to those who dared to see clearly.